We're doing one of the all-time greats today. Author that needs no introduction. Many of you will be familiar. For those that aren't, this is considered Dostoevsky's masterpiece, at least one of them. And if you are familiar with the book, though, feel free to skip over this little preface I'm going to give to the excerpt I'm going to read. So, for those that aren't familiar, this context will help. This is a long book, and it surrounds a murder. And the excerpt I'm going to read is going to be entirely dialogue. There's a little bit of narration in this excerpt, but I'm going to skip over it because it's not really necessary. And the dialogue is delivered by a lawyer named Fetyukovich, who is defending the accused, and he is suspected of patricide, murdering his own father. And Fetyukovich's comments challenge some long-standing beliefs, notions about family, how we think about family, our loyalty to family. So let me read, and then we'll have a detailed discussion about it. What is a father? I was asking just now, and exclaimed that it is a great word, precious appellation. But, gentlemen of the jury, one must treat words honestly, and I shall allow myself to name a thing by the proper word, the proper appellation. Such a father as the murdered old Karamazov cannot and does not deserve to be called a father. Love for a father that is not justified by the father is an absurdity, an impossibility. Love cannot be created out of nothing. Only God creates out of nothing. Fathers, provoke not your children, writes the apostle, from a heart aflame with love. I quote these holy words now, not for the sake of my client, but as a reminder to all fathers. Who has employed me? Who has empowered me to teach fathers? No one, but as a man and as a citizen, I call out, vivos voco. We are not long on this earth. We do many evil deeds and say many evil words. And therefore, let us all seize the favorable moment of our being together in order to say a good word to each other as well. And so I do. While I am in this place, I make the best of my moment. Not in vain is this tribune given to us by higher will. From here we can be heard by the whole of Russia. I speak not only to fathers here, but to all fathers I cry out, fathers, provoke not your children. Let us first fulfill Christ's commandment ourselves, and only then let us expect the same of our children. Otherwise we are not fathers, but enemies of our children. And they are not our children, but our enemies, and we ourselves have made them our enemies. With what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you. It is not I who say this, it is the gospel precepts. Measure with the same measure as it is measured to you. How can we blame our children if they measure to us with our own measure? Recently, a Finland girl, a servant, was suspected of secretly giving birth to a baby. They began watching her, and in the attic of the house, in a corner behind some bricks, found her chest, which no one knew about, opened it, and took out of it the little body of a newborn baby that she had killed. In the same chest were found two skeletons of babies she had given birth to previously and killed at the moment of birth, as she confessed. Gentlemen of the jury, was she a mother to her children? Yes, she gave birth to them, but was she a mother to them? Would any one of us dare pronounce over her the sacred name of mother? Let us be brave, gentlemen of the jury. Let us even be bold. It is even our duty to be so in the present moment, and not to be afraid of certain words and ideas, like Moscow merchants' wives, who are afraid of metal and brimstone. No, let us prove, on the contrary, that the progress of the past few years has touched our development as well. And let us say straight out, he who begets is not yet a father. A father is he who begets and proves worthy of it. Or of course there is another meaning, another interpretation of the word father, which insists that my father, though a monster, though a villain to his children, is still my father simply because he begot me. But this meaning is, so to speak, a mystical one, which I do not understand with my reason, but can only accept by faith, or more precisely, on faith, like many other things that I do not understand, but the religion nonetheless tells me to believe. But in that case, let it remain outside the sphere of real life, while within the sphere of real life, which not only has its rights, but itself imposes great obligations, within this sphere, if we wish to be humane, to be Christians finally, it is our duty and obligation to foster only those convictions that are justified by reason and experience, that have passed the crucible of analysis, in a word, to act sensibly and not senselessly, as in dreams or delirium, so as not to bring harm to a man, so as to not torment and ruin a man. Then it will be a real Christian deed, not only a mystical one, but a sensible and truly philanthropic deed. Do you think, gentlemen of the jury, that such questions can pass our children by? Let's say if they are now adolescents. Let's say if they are now beginning to reason. No, they cannot. And let us not ask such impossible forbearance of them. The sight of an unworthy father, especially in comparison with other fathers worthy of their children, his own peers, involuntarily presents a young man with tormenting questions. To these questions he receives the conventional answer: he begot you, you are of his blood, that is why you must love him. The young man involuntarily begins thinking, but did he love me when he was begetting me? He asks, wondering more and more. Did he beget me for my own sake? He did not know me, not even my sex at that moment, the moment of passion, probably heated up with wine, and probably all he did for me was pass on to me an inclination to drink. So much for his good deeds. Why should I love him just because he begot me, and then never loved me all my life? Or perhaps to you these questions appear coarse, cruel, but do not demand impossible forbearance from a young mind. Drive nature out the door and it will fly back in the window. And above all, let us not be afraid of metal and brimstone. Let us decide the question as reason and the love of man dictate, and not as dictated by mystical notions. How decide it then? Here is how. Let the son stand before his father and ask him reasonably, Father, tell me, why should I love you? Father, prove to me that I should love you. And if the father can, if he is able to answer and give him proof, then we have a real, normal family, established not just on mystical prejudice, but on reasonable, self-accountable, and strictly humane foundations. In the opposite case, if the father can give no proof, the family is finished then and there. He is not a father to his son, and the son is free and has the right henceforth to look upon his father as a stranger, and even as an enemy. Our tribune, gentlemen of the jury, should be a school of truth and sensible ideas. Okay, what a passage. So why am I sharing this? And how does it perhaps relate to our main theme we touch upon, which is therapeutic process, psychology, human relationships? Well, first of all, Dostoevsky, via Fetyukovich, is challenging a very long-standing commandment, principle, certainly within the Christian doctrine, this notion of honoring one's mother and father, but it goes beyond that. You can observe in many different cultures a commitment to filial piety. So to challenge this idea can be considered a kind of heresy. People can get pretty passionate about it. So to just maybe reiterate and recap Fetyukovich's argument, he's challenging this idea that by virtue of the fact that you share someone's blood, that they're deserving of your loyalty. And that if they do not demonstrate behavior that you believe warrants or is emblematic of a parent, for example, then you are free to disassociate yourselves from that person. You don't have an obligation to them. So, within the therapeutic domain, it's not uncommon for people to come and have concerns, complaints about the family of origin, and what to do about various relationships that they believe are problematic, contentious, or producing misery, suffering for them. Now, I'm not necessarily here to try to convince you to take Fetyukovich's side here. You're free to deliberate on that yourself, but perhaps I can articulate a more obvious truism that is more incontrovertible than the case that Fetyukovich is making, that perhaps will help you determine where you stand on this issue. So when we're kids, we're all born into this involuntary situation. We don't get an option, a chance, before we exist, before we're born, to sort of review, deliberate on, assess, evaluate different families that we could potentially join. We're just dropped into one, and we hope that it's a peaceful, loving one. And some of us are luckier than others, right? Now, as Fetyukovich said, the parents who are doing in the act of creating you, they don't know you either. They don't know who you're going to be. But they're still choosing to create life. So they're willingly taking that gamble. That, yeah, they don't know who you're going to be, but they decided to become parents. You don't decide to become a child, so there is a distinction there. Although there's still some unknowns on each side. But for a child, it's just fully involuntary. You don't choose, right? So if you are born into a family and it's very loving and peaceful, that's great, but you didn't choose that. And if it's very abusive or hostile, conflictual, you didn't choose that either. So either way, you're at the mercy of circumstance. And so in the scenario where it's hostile and abusive or violent, etc., stressful, it's fairly easy to view you as a victim in that situation because you couldn't choose an alternative. Now, once you grow up and you become an adult, the involuntary nature of your life and your association with your family changes. You gain agency, independence, self-determination. And so what was once an involuntary situation now changes into a voluntary one. Now, for some of you, it might not feel that way because you perhaps have been raised with a Christian ethic or even some other secular doctrine that promotes this obligation to family. And so you feel like, even though I'm an adult now, I still have this obligation, allegiance to my family, regardless of their behavior, their conduct. Now, you're free to believe that, but again, to go back to this truism that I'm highlighting here that appears fairly incontrovertible, it is just the case that you're free to associate with whomever you like once you're an adult, whether they're related to you by blood or not. And if you believe you have an obligation to certain people by virtue of the fact that they're related to you biologically, then that's still a choice. You're choosing that. Choosing to believe there's an obligation, which dictates your behavior to continue maintaining a relationship with these people. Now, if you have a lot of complaints about your family though, but you believe you must remain in contact with them, well, what do you do in that situation? You may feel that, well, I just have to tolerate it because I have to respect my elders, honor my family, etc. Okay? If you're willing to accept that trade-off, you're free to do that. But some people get into this situation where they want to hold on to this commitment to family, but they're really unhappy with how their family behaves and believe that they create a lot of misery for them. Now, perhaps you attempt then to address some of these issues, these grievances you have with your family. And let's say you try that and it doesn't work. They dismiss you, or maybe they recognize or accept that you're right, but then they don't change in a meaningful way. Well, what do you do then? Well, if you still are clinging to this commitment, to adhering to this principle of honoring your family or having an allegiance to people related to you, that birthed you, then even then, you may feel, well, I tried, but didn't work, but I still have to remain committed to them. Now, sometimes though, after that has all happened, people want to complain and view themselves as a victim. But does that make sense in the way that we agree that it did when you're a child, when you don't have choice? It's pretty easy to accept that a child that has no alternative options is a victim if they're harmed by the adults that they depend on. But if you're an adult and you now have agency and you've attempted to reform these relationships and it has not worked, and you're choosing to remain in contact with them, having had all this time to observe them, basically knowing what you're going to get now, having a pretty good idea of what you've signed up for, at that point, does it make sense to continue viewing yourself as a victim? That seems like a harder sell. And one could perhaps argue that at some point, if you're committed to that narrative, it becomes a kind of masochism, where you recognize that this behavior is unacceptable, and if someone that was not related to you by blood were to exhibit those behaviors, you wouldn't accept it and you would remove them from your life, whether it was a friend or a romantic partner. But so simply by virtue of the fact that they are related to you, you're tolerating this. But at the same time, you want to portray yourself as the victim in this situation, having been harmed by them. At that point, is it not self-inflicted though? Does it make sense to externalize the blame? Now you might be thinking or misinterpreting something I'm saying when I say this. So let me clarify here. Even if we grant what I just said, that doesn't mean that your family that may have behaved improperly have no moral agency. They can be fully responsible for their bad behavior, whilst at the same time, we can recognize that we are still choosing to expose ourselves to that bad behavior as an adult, because we now have this alternative, which is to not see them. Now, again, I'm not advocating that you don't see your parents. I don't obviously know any specific context regarding your particular family, so I can't make that determination. Only you can. But if we're an adult, we're the one that first has to allow people in, to give them access to us so that they can treat us well or they can treat us badly. And if there's no consequence for the bad treatment, then again, is it not at some point a self-inflicted wound? All right. So to just recap here, you have a few options. You can remain committed to the family allegiance principle, that by virtue of the fact that I'm blood related to these people, I owe them my allegiance no matter what. You're free to do that. But the danger in doing that is that if people know that you're loyal no matter what, they can potentially abuse that privilege. And if you're willing to tolerate that, then that's your prerogative. You're free to do that. Now, the alternative is to adopt Fetyukovich's perspective, which in essence he's just viewing your family like any other relationship, that it is about the behavior, how they conduct themselves, that determines your loyalty to them and the maintenance of the relationship. And as long as you believe that it remains mutually beneficial, whether it's a friendship, romantic relationship, or familial relationship, then you're happy to maintain it, cultivate it. But if you don't believe that there's a justifiable reason for your allegiance or commitment to someone, regardless of whether they're related to you or not, then it simply comes down to their behavior. And if we don't like what we're seeing, we can detach ourselves. So we view the family as just another voluntary relationship category, like friends and romantic relationships. To reiterate, I'm not taking a clear stand here on which way to think about this, and it's the same approach I take within therapy. I can't make this determination for someone else because they may not share my values, and it's their values that matter in determining what they want to do. All right, one other thing perhaps worth mentioning is that some people that are dissatisfied with their family relationships but nonetheless want to maintain them for whatever reason, they adopt a strategy whereby they just trying to keep their distance, basically. They minimize the amount of contact they have with their family. They perhaps only see them maybe a couple of times a year, just around holidays perhaps. And so when they see them, although it may be contentious, there's not enough time really for the temperature to really get out of control. And they have a lot of time afterwards then to decompress and for the stress level to be reduced. Now you can do that. Some people are content with that compromise. But a complication may arise if you want to establish your own family and you want to create a family that is very different, looks very different to the one you grew up in. And so because of that, you select a spouse that perhaps has very different values to that of your family of origin. And perhaps if you're very happy with that, well then, what happens when these worlds collide? If we're tolerating behavior that we consider highly problematic, but whether we've attempted to address it or not, we're still tolerating it. And then we invite our spouse in that shares our values. They get to observe this. Well, what are they to think? They may be put in quite a strange situation where they have a couple of options. They can sort of observe from the sidelines, keep their mouth shut, and potentially lose respect for you because they know that you're tolerating behavior that you otherwise wouldn't tolerate from other people, maybe including them. That might bother them. Or perhaps they choose to speak up themselves. And that creates a big conflict with your family. And then you're put in this strange position where now you're kind of stuck in the middle of this, and each side are expecting you to remain loyal to them. What do? Tricky. So it can get pretty messy. So that's just something to consider, another variable to consider when thinking about this. All right, let's leave it there. Hopefully that was useful for you. And obviously, by all means, take a look at the book for yourself if you're interested. This is one of the greats. I think Nietzsche said famously that Dostoevsky was the best psychologist, and it's hard to disagree. There's just so much in this book. It's just one little gem of many. Okay, thanks. Talk to you next time.